When I discovered my own granddaughter had killed my husband, I swore she would pay in blood. In the video, she laughed while he burned alive. The justice system failed, but these grandmothers' hands did not. Hello, my dear friends. How are you all doing today? I hope you're well and comfortable there on the other side of the screen. My name is Dorothy Williams. I'm 76 years old and have lived quite a life. And today I want to share with you a story I never thought would be mine. A story about love, loss, and difficult decisions we make when the world turns its back on us. Here where I am now, the days are all the same. I wake up early, make my bed carefully, and give thanks for another day, even with the limitations. I have my reading corner near the small window, where light timidly enters for a few hours. My companions here are the books I receive from the library and conversations with other ladies who, like me, carry heavy stories in their hearts. Conversation has become my favorite pastime these past years. It's funny how we value words when they're one of the few luxuries we have left. Before, I spoke little. I was more of a listener. Now, each conversation is a treasure. Each story exchanged is a small freedom that no one can take away from me. I truly began to appreciate the value of a good conversation after I lost everything. Before, I was always busy with my needlework, with the garden I kept in the backyard, with Sunday family dinners. Now, my wrinkled hands no longer embroider. They just intertwine while I listen to the stories of other ladies and share mine during permitted hours. The space where I stay is simple. A narrow bed, a small table, a chair. On the wall, I have just one old photograph, yellowed with time, me and my Charles, on our 40th wedding anniversary. It was the last photo we took together. His kind eyes, the calloused hands of a carpenter holding mine. Sometimes I spend hours looking at it, remembering every wrinkle on his face, every discreet smile he gave when he thought I wasn't looking. Before continuing my story, I'd like to ask a little favor from you all. If this is the first video of mine you're watching, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It's very important so more people can hear stories like mine. And you, my dears, who are watching me now, tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. What I'm going to tell today isn't easy, neither for me who lived it, nor for you who will hear it. It's a story about how love can be so strong that sometimes it transforms into something we don't even recognize anymore. About how, when we lose someone we love in a cruel way, something inside us can change forever. It all started many years ago, when I was just a young girl full of dreams. When I met my Charles and thought we would have a simple but happy life, I never imagined that one day I would be here, looking back and trying to understand how blood ties can sometimes be the most dangerous. How someone from our own family can bring darkness into our home. I've been told I should regret it, that I should beg for forgiveness every day. But how can you regret protecting those you love? How can you ask forgiveness for doing what no one else had the courage to do? These are questions that accompany me during the long nights, as I look at the ceiling and remember Charles's face, the warmth of his hand in mine, and how everything changed on that fateful day. But to understand how I got here, I need to go way back. I need to tell you about my childhood, about how I was raised, and how I learned early on that family is the most precious thing we have. I was born in a simple house in rural Virginia, daughter of Joseph and Martha. My father worked the fields, one of those men with calloused hands and a soft heart. My mother was a seamstress, making dresses for the ladies in the region. We were a simple family, but we never lacked what mattered most, love and respect for one another. I had two older brothers, Ben and Jack, who from an early age helped Dad with the farm work. Our house was small, but cozy. The wooden floor that Mama swept every day with a straw broom. The walls that Daddy would reinforce before each storm season. The wood stove that warmed the house on cold mornings and gave off that fresh coffee smell I still feel in my memories. The big backyard where Mama grew herbs for tea and spices for cooking. That's where I played with my cloth doll, made by my mother's skilled hands. Life was simple, but it had its own beauty. We woke up with the rooster's crow even before the sun rose. Mama was already up, preparing coffee for Daddy to take to the fields. After he left, we helped with household chores, sweeping the house, washing dishes, feeding the chickens. Only then could we play a little, before going to the rural school, which was a half-hour walk from our house. At school, I was diligent. I loved reading, even with few books available. The teacher, Miss Eleanor, said I had a good head for studies. But studying beyond 4th grade was a luxury that a farmer's daughter couldn't afford back then. So I learned the basics: reading, writing, and arithmetic. The rest of my education came from life and the teachings of my elders. My best friend was Izzy, the neighbor's daughter. We spent hours playing house, with dolls, singing in circles. On hot summer afternoons, we'd go to the small creek that ran through her father's land and dip our feet in the water, talking about what our future would be like. We dreamed of marrying good men like our fathers, having healthy children, a clean and tidy house. Simple dreams from simple girls. On Sundays, the whole family would dress up for church. Mama would put on her only good dress, the one she kept in a box with mint leaves to keep the moths away. Daddy would apply his only cologne, a gift from my godfather. We children would wear the clean clothes Mama set aside especially for that day. After the service, families would gather in the churchyard to talk, exchange news, arrange work bees. It was on one of those Sundays that I saw Charles for the first time. He had come with his family, who lived on the other side of town. He was a quiet boy, with a gentle gaze, but firm hands that already knew work from an early age. His father was a carpenter, and Charles was learning the trade, creating pieces that people said were so beautiful they looked drawn, not carved in wood. When our eyes met, I felt a warmth in my chest that I had never felt before. I was 15 at the time, and he was 17. Life on the farm taught me a lot about nature, about the cycle of things. I saw the sunrise and sunset every day. I watched plants grow from planting to harvest. I learned to respect this natural cycle, to understand that everything has its time, but I also learned that sometimes nature can be cruel. Storms that destroyed crops, droughts that killed animals, diseases that took loved ones. My grandmother used to say that life gives and life takes, and that we needed to accept God's designs. It was at 16 that I had my first heartbreak. Ben, my oldest brother, drowned in the same creek where Izzy and I played. It was a Sunday, after a heavy rain that flooded the creek. He went to pull out a stranded calf, and the current took him away. They found his body 2 days later, already lifeless. I saw my father, a strong man who never showed weakness, cry like a child. I saw my mother, always so talkative, stay silent for weeks. It was the first time I understood that death can take more than a person. It takes a piece of those who remain. This loss changed our family. Daddy became quieter, Mama more worried. Jack, my other brother, took on Ben's responsibilities on the farm, maturing before his time. And I learned that life is fragile, that we can lose those we love in the blink of an eye. Perhaps that's why I became so attached to the idea of having my own family, a little place where I could protect my loved ones. Charles and I started dating when I turned 17. It was a courtship, as they used to do back then, respectful, with him visiting our home, always under the watchful eye of my parents. He would bring me wildflowers that he picked on the way, small wooden objects that he carved himself, a little bird, a box for my hair ribbons. Simple things, but made with such care that they were worth more than gold to me. We got married when I turned 19. It was a simple celebration in my parents' backyard. Mama made a cornbread, the neighbors helped with the food. I wore a white dress that was my mother's, adjusted by her skilled hands to fit me. Charles wore his father's suit, a bit big on the shoulders, but he was so handsome that I didn't even notice it at the time. The honeymoon was just a weekend in the house he built for us, with help from his father and friends on the land we received from his parents. It was a small house, just 2 rooms, but to me it was a palace. The walls still smelled of fresh paint. The furniture made by Charles and his father still had that nice smell of new wood. The bed had a mattress that Mama made, filled with fresh corn husks. And there, in that little corner that was just ours, we began our life together. Charles worked with his father in the carpentry shop during the day, and at night he came home, always bringing something small for me, an out-of-season fruit he found at the market, a pretty fabric scrap for me to make a tablecloth. I took care of the house, planted some vegetables in the yard, made bread to sell to the neighbors. It was a simple life, but we were happy. It was difficult when the news came that I was expecting a baby. Not because we didn't want it, but because we knew about the difficulties. Times were different. There wasn't a health center nearby. Midwives were becoming scarce. But Charles calmed me down, said we would find a way, that our child would have a good life. We prayed every night that everything would go well. And so, between simple joys and daily difficulties, we were building our family, our home. Not knowing that, many years later, that same family would be the source of the greatest pain I've ever felt, and also of the hardest decision that a mother and grandmother could make. Our only son, Alan, was born on a night of heavy rain. I remember as if it were yesterday. Charles had to run out to fetch Mrs. Josie, the midwife, while I bit a cloth to keep from screaming loudly with the pain. When my boy finally came into the world, it was as if a piece of heaven had fallen into my lap. He was so tiny, with a light fuzz on top of his head and squinting eyes, as if the world's light was still too strong for him. Charles cried when he held his son for the first time. My husband, a man of few words, looked at that little being and said, "I'm going to build a good world for you, my son." It was the most beautiful promise I've ever heard. Alan grew up strong and healthy. He was a calm boy, similar to his father in temperament, but he had my eyes. Charles insisted that he study. "My son won't be limited like us," he always said. And so, Alan was the first in the family to finish his studies, to enter college. He graduated as a teacher, which was a source of great pride for us. When Alan was 25, he met Cynthia at a party at the school where he taught. She was young, beautiful, from a family in town. At first, I confess I had my reservations. Cynthia seemed so different from us, wore fashionable clothes, had studied in private schools. But who was I to judge? What mattered was my son's happiness. They married in a bigger event than ours had been. Her family insisted on a ceremony in the big church in town, with a reception afterwards at a rented hall. Charles and I felt a bit out of place in that environment, but we were happy for our son. A year after the wedding, I received the news that I would be a grandmother. My heart filled with a joy that cannot be put into words. Charles immediately began making a carved wooden crib for the little grandson or granddaughter who would come. When we learned it would be a girl, he insisted on carving delicate flowers on the headboard. "For Grandma and Grandpa's little princess," he would say, with that gentle smile I loved so much. Vanessa was born on a sunny spring morning. She was a beautiful baby, with large dark eyes, black hair like her mother's. When I held her for the first time, I had a strange feeling. Something in her eyes. An emptiness that I couldn't understand at the time. But I quickly dismissed that thought. It was just a silly impression from an anxious grandma. Vanessa's first years were normal, at least apparently. She grew up beautiful and smart. She learned to talk early, to walk early. Charles and I doted on her, as grandparents usually do. We brought presents whenever we visited, spent hours playing with her. Alan was a dedicated father, and Cynthia, although sometimes more distant, seemed to take good care of the girl. It was when Vanessa was about 5 years old that I noticed the first signs that something wasn't right. We were in our backyard, where I had a small garden. Vanessa found a bird fallen from the nest, still a nestling. Instead of calling an adult to help, as most children would do, she took a small stone and began to poke the poor thing. When I saw her, the bird was already, well, it was no longer alive. "Vanessa, why did you do that?" I asked, horrified. "I wanted to see what it was like inside," she replied, with a calmness that chilled my blood. I told Charles later, and he was also concerned. We tried to talk to Alan, but he downplayed the matter. "Dad, Mom, she's just a curious child. Children do these things sometimes." Maybe he was right. Maybe we were overreacting. But the incidents continued. One day, I found Vanessa in the guest room, where we kept some old mementos. She had taken a porcelain doll that was my mother's, a family heirloom. The doll was without arms, without legs, with its face scribbled with red pen. "What happened to the doll, Vanessa?" "It was ugly. I made it prettier," replied the girl, with that same empty look. When we told Cynthia, she got irritated, not with her daughter, but with us. "You left an old doll within reach of a small child, and now you want to blame her? Honestly." It was the first time I felt a distance opening between us and our son's family, a distance that would only increase as the years passed. As Vanessa grew, the strange behaviors became more evident. At school, the complaints began. She constantly lied, invented elaborate stories to get other children in trouble. Once, she said a classmate had stolen her lunch, causing the boy to be punished. Later, they discovered that she herself had thrown the food in the trash. At home, when we visited, she had a different behavior depending on who was around. With her parents, she was sweet and obedient. When she was alone with her grandparents, she showed a different face. She looked at us as if she was evaluating us, as if she was looking for weaknesses. I remember one time when she was about 9 years old, we were making cookies together. Charles was in the yard, fixing a chair. Vanessa looked at me and said suddenly, "Grandma, you know that people die when they get old, right? You and Grandpa are already old." I tried to explain that yes, everyone dies someday, but that we still had many years ahead of us. She continued mixing the cookie dough and added, with a voice too calm for a child, "I've seen a cat die before. It made funny noises. Do you think people also make noises when they die?" I confess I was speechless. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it. Without emotion, without the natural curiosity of a child, just a cold observation. I told Charles afterward, and he was also disturbed. We tried to talk to Alan again. This time, we suggested that perhaps Vanessa needed some kind of professional help. "What are you insinuating? That my daughter has some mental problem? She's just an intelligent and curious child. You're seeing things that don't exist." Cynthia was even harsher. "I always knew you didn't really like her. Now you're trying to invent problems. Maybe it's better if we limit visits for a while." And so it was done. For almost a year, we saw our granddaughter only on special occasions, always under the supervision of her parents. Charles was devastated. He loved that girl so much, despite everything. "Dorothy," he told me one night, "is it us? Are we seeing evil where there's just a normal child?" I began to question myself. Maybe we were judging unfairly. Maybe, being from another generation, we didn't understand how children were these days. When we were finally authorized to visit more freely, Vanessa was 12 years old. She was bigger, prettier, and apparently more controlled. In the first visits, she behaved perfectly. Charles and I began to think that maybe we were wrong after all. Until that Sunday afternoon. We were all gathered for lunch. Alan and Cynthia had gone out to buy dessert, leaving Vanessa with us. Her cousin Annie, Cynthia's sister's daughter, was also there. Annie was 7 years old, a sweet and shy little girl. The two were playing in the bedroom while Charles and I tidied up the kitchen. Suddenly, we heard a scream. We ran to the room and found Annie on the floor, with Vanessa on top of her, hands around the younger girl's neck. The child was red, struggling to breathe. "Vanessa!" shouted Charles, running to separate the two. "What are you doing?" Vanessa released her cousin and stood up, adjusting her clothes as if nothing had happened. "We were just playing doctor. I was the doctor and she was the patient." Annie was crying, still trying to catch her breath. When the little girl was able to speak, between sobs, she said she wanted to see if I turned blue. Charles lost his composure for the first time I can remember. He held Vanessa by the shoulders and said with a firm voice, "This is not a game, Vanessa. You could have seriously hurt your cousin. This is dangerous and wrong." That's when I saw something in her eyes that froze me inside. A look of pure hatred, followed by a smile that had nothing childlike about it. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I won't do it again. It was just a game." But when Alan and Cynthia returned, and we told them what had happened, the story Vanessa told was completely different. According to her, Annie had broken her favorite doll on purpose, and when Vanessa got upset, her cousin began to thrash on the floor, pretending she was being attacked. Vanessa said she was only trying to calm her cousin down, and to our horror, Annie, perhaps out of fear, confirmed Vanessa's version. At that moment, Charles couldn't take it. "That's not true. We saw what happened." That's when everything fell apart for good. Cynthia accused us of having a grudge against her daughter. Alan, trying to appease, only made the situation worse by suggesting that perhaps we had misinterpreted what we saw. In the heat of the argument, Charles did something he would bitterly regret later. When Vanessa continued to lie, looking him directly in the eyes with that little smile, he lost control and slapped her face. It wasn't a hard slap, but enough to leave everyone in shock. Vanessa didn't cry. Instead, she looked at her grandfather with those cold eyes and said softly, but clear enough for all of us to hear, "You'll regret that, Grandpa." After that terrible Sunday, nothing was the same again. Alan and Cynthia left our house furious, taking Vanessa and little Annie. The last words our son directed at us that afternoon were as hard as stones. "You've crossed the line. I never thought my own father, a man who always preached respect, would raise his hand to a child. I don't know when we can see each other again." Charles spent the whole night awake, sitting on the porch, his face in his hands. I had never seen him so dejected, not even when he lost his own father years ago. "What have I done, Dorothy? I lost my head. I hit a child, our little granddaughter." I tried to console him, saying it was a moment of weakness, that he was defending Annie, that Vanessa had crossed all boundaries. But nothing eased his guilt. That look in her eyes, Dorothy. Those words. "You'll regret that, Grandpa." It wasn't a normal reaction from a child who got slapped. It was something else. The following week, we tried to make contact several times. We called, sent messages through neighbors. I even wrote a letter asking for forgiveness. Charles was willing to get down on his knees in front of everyone and apologize to Vanessa if that could fix things. But all our attempts were met with silence. The worst was when Charles tried to visit the carpentry shop where Alan worked with him. Yes, our son had followed in his father's footsteps, despite his education degree. When he arrived there, Charles's business partner said that Alan had asked him to let Charles know that he didn't want to see him, that it was better to give it time. That broke my husband inside. The carpentry shop was his pride, the place where father and son shared not just work, but also dreams and plans. It was the legacy that Charles was building to leave for Alan, and now it was becoming another symbol of the abyss growing between us. Weeks passed, then months. We tried to stay in touch with mutual friends and neighbors just to know how the family was doing. That's how we discovered that Vanessa had been transferred to another school. Adaptation problems was what they said. At the new school, she quickly became an exemplary student, involved in extracurricular activities, beloved by teachers. "See, it was you who were wrong about her," a well-meaning neighbor told us, not knowing how much those words hurt. After 6 months without contact, we received a call from Alan. His voice was different, more contained. "Dad, Mom, Vanessa asked to talk to you. She said she misses her grandparents, that she wants to make peace." Charles's heart almost leaped out of his chest. He believed that this was the chance to rebuild the family, to correct his mistake. We immediately agreed to have them over for Sunday lunch, like in the old days. I spent the entire week preparing everyone's favorite dishes. Charles cleaned the house from top to bottom, fixed up the garden, even repaired the rocking chair on the porch that Alan had liked since he was a child. We were as nervous as teenagers on a first date. When they arrived, Vanessa ran to hug her grandfather. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I lost my temper that day, too. I love you so much." Charles couldn't hold back the tears. He hugged his granddaughter tightly, murmuring words of apology. For a moment, everything seemed right again. The lunch went on with a forced normalcy. We all avoided touching on the subject that had separated us. We talked about work, the weather, the news. Vanessa was particularly adorable, helping to serve the table, asking to hear old stories from when her father was a child. After dessert, when we were having coffee on the porch, Vanessa asked to show her grandfather a school project. Charles, happy with the apparent reconciliation, followed her to the guest room where she had left her backpack. I stayed in the kitchen, talking with Alan and Cynthia. That's when I heard a noise coming from the room. It wasn't loud, but there was something wrong with it. I excused myself and went to check. Upon entering the room, I found Charles sitting on the bed, as pale as a sheet. Vanessa was standing in front of him, that same cold smile on her lips. On the bed, there were some photos. "What's going on here?" I asked, approaching. Charles didn't answer. I took the photos and felt my blood freeze. They were pictures of dead animals, small animals like squirrels, birds, even a kitten, in different stages of, well, I don't even want to describe it. Next to them, always Vanessa, sometimes with what appeared to be a small knife or scissors in hand. "Vanessa, what is this?" I managed to ask, my voice almost disappearing. "These are my science projects, Grandma. I'm studying anatomy. Isn't it interesting how we're all the same on the inside?" At that moment, Alan entered the room. He saw the photos in my hands and snatched them forcefully. "Where did you find this? Were you going through her things?" "No, son. She showed them to us. Said it was a school project." Charles finally found his voice. Alan looked at Vanessa, who now had tears in her eyes, tears that I could swear weren't there seconds before. "Dad, Mom, why are you doing this? I just wanted to show Grandpa my zoo photos. They took these horrible pictures from I don't know where and are saying they're mine." It was as if the ground disappeared from under my feet. The lie was so absurd, so blatant, that I was speechless. Charles stood up, trying to approach his son. "Alan, son, you know us. Do you really think we would invent something like this? Look at these photos. Look at her face in them. It's Vanessa." But Alan didn't want to see. Perhaps he couldn't face the truth about his own daughter. He crumpled the photos, threw them on the floor, and said, with a voice that didn't sound like his, "Enough. I tried. I swear I tried to give a chance. But you can't accept Vanessa. You can't see that she's just a normal child. Maybe it's better if we don't see each other for a while." Cynthia appeared at the door, looking at the scene in amazement. Alan took Vanessa by the hand and left, practically dragging his wife along. From the front door, we could still hear Vanessa say, in a voice loud enough to reach us, "Daddy, Grandma hid my backpack. My zoo photos were in there." And so, our son walked out of our lives again, this time for a much longer period. We were devastated. Charles couldn't sleep properly, barely ate. I myself felt like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. "Dorothy," Charles told me one night, "I'm afraid. Not for us, but for Alan, for Cynthia, even for that poor little girl Annie. Vanessa, there's something very wrong with her." We spent the following months trying to convince Alan to seek professional help for Vanessa. We sent articles about problematic behaviors in adolescence, recommendations for psychologists, even a book about children with conduct disorders. Everything came back unopened, sometimes with a short note. Stop this. The situation became unsustainable. Neighbors began to comment. Friends took sides. Some saw us as the problematic grandparents who didn't accept their granddaughter, others as victims of an ungrateful family. That's when Charles had the idea of moving. He had an old friend from his youth who lived in another town, a few hours away. This friend had offered him a partnership in a small local carpentry shop. Maybe it's better this way, Dorothy, to give space. Maybe with time, Alan will realize the truth on his own. The decision to leave the town where we had lived all our lives was difficult, but it seemed like the only way out. We sold our house. Charles sold his part in the carpentry shop to his partner, for much less than it was worth, just to close the deal quickly. And we left with heavy hearts, but hopeful that time could heal the wounds. Our new life began modestly. The house was smaller than the old one. The carpentry shop needed renovations. But we were together, and that's what mattered. Charles, always a hard worker, threw himself into the new business with enthusiasm. In a few months, they already had a small, loyal clientele, enchanted by my husband's talent for detailed woodwork. I started making cakes and sweets to sell. It was something I always liked, and it helped me pass the time, not think so much about the family we left behind. We made some friends, got involved in the local community. It wasn't the life we had planned for our old age, but it was a dignified, peaceful life. We maintained minimal contact with Alan, phone calls on important dates, Christmas cards. He never came to visit us, and we weren't invited to their house. About Vanessa, the news was always superficial. She's doing well in school. She won an essay contest. Nothing that would let us really know how she was doing. And so we spent almost 2 years building this new life, trying not to look back too much, although our hearts still ached with longing for our only son. Until that Sunday morning, when we received a phone call that would change our lives forever. The phone call came from an unknown number. I answered while Charles was in the shower. "Mrs. Dorothy." The voice on the other end was formal, grave. "This is Sheriff Evans. It's about your son, Alan Williams." My heart stopped for a moment. At my age, a call from a sheriff about a relative never brings good news. "What happened to my son? Is he okay?" "Your son is fine, ma'am. But there was an incident." I prefer not to go into details over the phone. "Could you come to the station? It's important that it be as soon as possible." Charles and I left that same morning. The journey back to our old town seemed to last an eternity, although it was just a few hours. My mind created the worst possible scenarios. Had Alan been involved in some accident, or was it something related to Vanessa? At the station, we were received by Sheriff Evans, a middle-aged man with deep, dark circles of someone who hadn't slept properly for days. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams, thank you for coming so quickly. Please, sit down." He looked at us with an expression that mixed compassion and discomfort. "There was an incident at your son's house. Your granddaughter, Vanessa, has made a serious accusation." I felt Charles stiffen beside me. "What kind of accusation?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "She claims that your son, Alan, has abused her for several years." It was as if the ground had opened beneath our feet. Charles jumped to his feet. "That's absurd. My son would never do such a thing. Vanessa is lying, as she's always lied." The sheriff raised his hands, asking for calm. "I understand your reaction, sir, but we need to investigate all accusations of this type seriously." The girl gave convincing details, and there's a video which she secretly recorded. At this moment, he hesitated, looking at me. "Ma'am, perhaps it's better if you wait outside while I show this video to your husband." "No," I replied firmly. "If it's about my son, I want to see it too." The sheriff nodded reluctantly and turned on a small TV. What we saw in the next few minutes was indescribable. A video where it appeared to be Alan entering Vanessa's room late at night, approaching her bed. "This is a fake!" shouted Charles, turning off the device with trembling hands. "My son would never do that. Never!" The sheriff sighed heavily. "We also found it strange. That's why we called you. Alan denies it vehemently, of course. Says he never entered his daughter's room that way. Cynthia is devastated, doesn't know who to believe. Vanessa is with social workers now." "And why did you call us?" I asked, still trying to process the horror of those images. "Because your son mentioned that you had concerns about Vanessa's behavior. Said that you tried to warn them several times." Charles and I looked at each other. After so long being ignored, being treated as the villains of the story, finally someone wanted to listen to us. But under what circumstances? We spent the following hours reporting everything to the sheriff. The small dead animals, the elaborate lies, the attempt to hurt Cousin Annie, the disturbing photos. The sheriff took notes, occasionally asking questions to clarify some point. "Do you have any of this evidence? The photos you mentioned, for example?" We shook our heads. Everything had been left behind when we moved. "Unfortunately, it's your word against hers, and she has a video, however suspicious it may be." We were able to see Alan briefly. He was unrecognizable, thin, dejected, eyes red from someone who had cried until they had no more tears. "Dad, Mom, you were right all along. Vanessa, I don't know what happened to her, where we went wrong in raising her. She's destroying our family with lies. Cynthia doesn't know who to believe, is on the verge of collapse, and I can lose everything. My job, my freedom, my reputation." It was a brief meeting, supervised by an officer. We promised to do everything in our power to help, to prove his innocence. In the days that followed, we stayed in town, staying at a small hotel. Charles reactivated old contacts, talked with neighbors, with Vanessa's former teachers, trying to gather any information that could help Alan. I went to the school, tried to talk to Vanessa's friends, with parents of other students. What we discovered was disturbing. Behind the facade of an exemplary student, there were unsettling rumors. A classmate who suddenly changed schools after a disagreement with Vanessa. A teacher who requested a transfer after accusing Vanessa of cheating on a test, and then withdrew the accusation for reasons never clarified. Small incidents that, isolated, seemed insignificant, but together formed a worrying pattern. But nothing was concrete enough. Nothing that could compete with a video as much as we suspected its authenticity. It was on one of those nights, returning exhausted to the hotel, that we found Cynthia waiting for us in the lobby. She was unrecognizable, disheveled hair, dark circles, trembling hands. "You were right," she said, her voice almost gone. "I found something terrible." On her tablet, she showed us Vanessa's conversations in a messaging app. They were exchanges with an older boy, where she boasted about how easy it was to manipulate her parents, about how she planned to get rid of her father to keep the inheritance from her mother's family. She told him she was going to destroy Alan, that she was going to accuse him of horrible things, that she had learned to edit videos, that no one would suspect. Charles took her hands, trying to calm her down. "Cynthia, this is evidence. Did you show this to the police?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Vanessa discovered that I saw, deleted everything. These screenshots I saved. She says they're fake, that I fabricated them because I'm having a nervous breakdown. And the worst part? They're believing her. That night, we made a plan. Cynthia would go to the station the next day with the screenshots. Charles would accompany her, along with a lawyer he had hired to help Alan. I would stay at the hotel, trying to contact the boy with whom Vanessa exchanged messages. But the next morning, everything changed. We were awakened by violent knocks on the hotel door. It was the same Sheriff Evans, accompanied by 2 officers. "Mr. Williams, I need you to come with me." "What happened?" I asked, grabbing Charles's arm. There was another Incident. At your son's house. Charles turned pale. Alan, is he okay? Your son is in protective custody. It's about the girl Vanessa. The sheriff hesitated, then continued, his voice grave. She was found unconscious this morning. It seems she tried to harm herself. She left a letter blaming her grandparents for turning her father against her, saying she couldn't take living like this anymore. My blood froze in my veins. I looked at Charles and saw the same horror in his eyes. This is a setup, he murmured, more to himself than to the sheriff. She's incriminating us too. Sir, I need you to come with me to provide clarification. The situation is serious. The days that followed were a nightmare. Charles spent hours at the station, answering the same questions, repeating our version of the facts. Alan was formally accused of assaulting his daughter. Apparently, Vanessa had confessed that the abuse accusations were false, but insisted that her father had beaten her multiple times. Cynthia tried to show the screenshots to the police, but as Vanessa had predicted, they were considered questionable evidence. And us? We were the problematic grandparents who always had issues with their granddaughter, who abandoned the family when they needed it most, who now incited the father against the daughter. A week after this nightmare began, Charles had to return to our new town. The carpentry shop couldn't stay closed for so long, and we needed money to help pay for Alan's lawyer. I'll be back at the end of the week, he promised, hugging me at the bus station. Everything will be all right, Dorothy. The truth always comes out. It was the last time I saw my husband alive. 3 days after Charles's departure, I received another phone call. It was in the middle of the night, and the shrill ring of the phone pulled me from a restless sleep, full of nightmares. It was Gerald, Charles's friend and partner in the carpentry shop. His voice was choked, almost unrecognizable. Mrs. Dorothy, a tragedy happened. The carpentry shop. There was a fire. My heart seemed to stop. Charles? Where is Charles? The silence on the other end of the line was the most painful answer I've ever received in my life. I don't really remember the hours that followed. I know that Gerald arranged my trip back, that some kind soul accompanied me on the bus, that I arrived at our new town to find only ashes where before was the carpentry shop that Charles loved so much. The authorities said it was an accident. A short circuit, probably. Charles used to work late, especially when he was worried. They said he must have fallen asleep in the small office he had in the back, that the smoke probably killed him before the flames reached him. They tried to comfort me by saying that he didn't suffer, as if that could diminish my pain. The funeral was simple, as Charles would have wanted. Some friends from the new town, Gerald and his wife, 2 or 3 neighbors. Alan couldn't come. He was still under investigation, couldn't leave the city. Cynthia sent flowers and a handwritten card with kind words about the father-in-law she always admired. From Vanessa, nothing. Not a word, not a gesture. In the weeks that followed, I moved like a ghost. I stayed in the house we shared, surrounded by memories of Charles in every corner. His slippers still beside the bed, his favorite shirt still hanging behind the door, his smell, which gradually faded from the pillows, from the clothes, leaving only increasingly tenuous memories. Gerald took care of the insurance, the documents, all the formalities. He had been a good friend to Charles and continued to be for me. His wife, Margaret, brought me food every day, made sure I was eating, tried to convince me to go out, not to isolate myself completely. It was Margaret who answered the door that afternoon, about a month after Charles's death. I was in the kitchen, trying to force myself to eat something, when I heard her talking to someone. Then she came in, holding a brown envelope. "Dorothy, this arrived for you. Special delivery. I had to sign for it." The envelope had no sender, just my name and address, written in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside, there was a small device, a flash drive, and an anonymous note. "This explains everything. Be careful." Margaret stayed with me as we connected the flash drive to the old computer that Charles used for the carpentry shop's accounting. There was only one file, a video. What I saw in the next few minutes changed my life forever. The video showed the carpentry shop at night. The date in the lower corner indicated exactly the night of the fire. The quality wasn't very good. It seemed to have been recorded from some security camera nearby. It showed someone approaching stealthily from the back of the carpentry shop. The figure was hooded, but when they briefly turned to look around, the face became visible for an instant under the light of a lamppost. It was Vanessa. She entered through the back, using what appeared to be a key. How did she get a key? I never knew. Maybe she stole Charles's key at some point, made a copy. The video showed only the exterior, not what happened inside. But about 20 minutes later, Vanessa came running out. A few minutes later, smoke began to appear. The recording continued for a few more minutes, showing the smoke increasing, then the first visible flames through the windows. It ended with the arrival of the firefighters, already too late. But the most shocking was yet to come. The video then cut to another recording, apparently made with a cell phone. It showed Vanessa, alone in what looked like a bedroom, looking directly at the camera. She smiled, not as a normal teenager would smile, but with a cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Hello, Grandma," she said, her voice calm, almost sweet. "If you're seeing this, it means that someone finally did the right thing. I wanted you to know that Grandpa suffered. It wasn't quick like they're telling you. He woke up with the smell of smoke. He tried to get out. The door was locked from the outside. He screamed, banged on the door, tried to break the window. But I had planned everything. The windows were reinforced, remember? Grandpa himself installed those bars after that break-in last year." She paused, tilting her head slightly to the side, as if she was contemplating a pleasant memory. "When I went in there, he was sleeping. So easy. I put a sedative in his coffee earlier when I visited the carpentry shop. I said I wanted to make peace, that I was sorry for all the confusion with Daddy. He believed it, of course. Grandpa was always so trusting." Margaret let out a muffled scream beside me. I was paralyzed, unable to look away from the screen, unable even to cry. "Do you know why I did this, Grandma?" Vanessa continued. "Remember that slap he gave me? You'll regret that, Grandpa. I always keep my promises. Always." She moved closer to the camera, her dark eyes glowing with something I had never seen before in a human being. "Now it's your turn to suffer, Grandma, living alone, knowing that your husband died because of you. If you had left me alone, none of this would have happened. But no, you had to be concerned about my behavior. You had to try to make Daddy and Mommy take me to specialists, as if there was something wrong with me." She laughed, a sound empty of any real joy. "There's nothing wrong with me. I am exactly what I should be. And now you're going to live with this, with the truth that no one else will believe. Because who would suspect a poor, traumatized teenager who just wants a normal life? Everyone will think you've gone mad with grief if you try to tell anyone." The video ended abruptly. I sat staring at the black screen, feeling something inside me break, and at the same time, something new emerge. A resolution, a certainty. "Dorothy," Margaret murmured beside me, her voice trembling. "We need to take this to the police, right now." I shook my head slowly. "No. You heard what she said. No one will believe us. They'll say it's a montage, just like they said about the video she fabricated against Alan. But we have to do something. She killed Charles. She confessed." I looked at my friend, feeling a strange calm envelop me. "Yes, we're going to do something, but not the way you're thinking." In the days that followed, I made preparations. First, I created a copy of the flash drive and hid it in a safe place. Then, I called Alan. The conversation was brief, painful. He was still under investigation, but things seemed to be improving. Cynthia had finally convinced the authorities to investigate Vanessa's accusations more thoroughly, and some inconsistencies were emerging. "Mom, She asked about you the other day, said Alan. Said she wanted to visit you, console you for Dad's loss. I felt my heart race. And what did you say? I said I would talk to you, see if you were ready for visitors. She seemed eager. Tell her I am, son, that I'll be happy to see her. The trap was set. I knew that Vanessa would come not to console me, but to make sure I was suffering, to savor her victory, maybe even to eliminate one more obstacle if she suspected I knew something. Margaret didn't approve of my plan. She begged me to reconsider, to let justice take its course. But what justice would that be? The justice that was almost condemning my son for crimes he didn't commit? The justice that allowed Vanessa to manipulate everyone for so many years? What are you planning, Dorothy? Asked Margaret, concern evident in her voice. Just a conversation, I replied. A conversation between grandmother and granddaughter. When Vanessa arrived, 3 days later, I was ready. The house was tidy, fresh coffee on the table, cakes that I knew she liked. I played the part of the grieving grandmother to perfection. My dear, I said, opening my arms to hug her at the door. How good to see you. She returned the hug with the same falsity. Grandma, I'm so sorry for your loss. How are you? We chatted about trivialities for some time. She told about school, about how things were improving at home. I talked about my lonely life, about how I missed Charles. I observed how she savored each word of pain, how her eyes gleamed when I mentioned how hard the loneliness was. When I served the coffee, she hesitated for a moment before accepting the cup. Something wrong with the coffee, dear? She smiled, that same smile that never reached her eyes. No, Grandma, I was just admiring the cup. It's beautiful. It was from your grandfather's favorite set, I said, watching her carefully. I noticed a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes upon hearing this. She took a sip, then another. We talked a bit more until I noticed her eyes starting to get heavy, her words a little slurred. Are you feeling well, Vanessa? I'm a little dizzy. Must be the tiredness from the trip, I suggested, getting up to help her. Come, I'll take you to rest a bit in the guest room. She tried to stand up, but her legs gave way. I held her, feeling her body getting increasingly limp in my arms. What did you do? She murmured, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. I just offered you some coffee, dear, the same way you offered it to your grandfather that day. Panic began to take over her face, but she was already too weak to react. I helped her lie down on the sofa and waited for the sedative to take full effect. It didn't take long. What happened next, I don't like to recall in detail. Let's just say that Vanessa woke up in an isolated place, secure, where no one could hear us, a place carefully prepared in the previous days. When she finally opened her eyes, I was sitting in front of her, the flash drive in my hand. Hello, dear. We have a lot to talk about. I showed her the video. I saw the shock on her face when she realized that her crime had been documented, that her confession was recorded. How did you get this? She asked, her voice still slurred from the effect of the sedative. Someone with a conscience, I replied simply. Someone who saw what you did and couldn't stay silent. I talked at length with Vanessa that night. I asked questions that had tormented me for years. Why was she like this? Since when? Was there any moment when we could have helped change the course of events? Her answers were disturbing in their simplicity. There was no trauma, no cause for her behavior. She simply was like that. She always knew she was different. She always saw others' emotions as tools to be manipulated. Love, compassion, empathy, they were concepts that she understood intellectually but never felt. What are you going to do with me? She finally asked, as the sun began to rise outside. I looked at her, my granddaughter, my blood, the being who had taken from me the love of my life. And I made the hardest decision of my life. I'm going to do what no one had the courage to do, Vanessa. I'm going to protect the world from you. What happened next is something I carry with me every day. The weight of the decision, the weight of the act. I'm not proud. I don't regret it. I did what had to be done, what no system, no institution, no law would do. When it was all over, I went back home. I called Alan to say that Vanessa had left early, that she had said she needed to meet some friends in town. I waited for the alarm to be raised, for the search to begin. And then I did what I needed to do. I walked into a police station and confessed. I handed over the evidence of what Vanessa had done to Charles. I told the whole story, from the beginning, and I took responsibility for what had happened to her. The investigation was long. Vanessa's video confessing to Charles's murder was considered sufficient evidence to close the case of the fire. The charges against Alan were dropped, his reputation partially restored. Cynthia eventually found some kind of peace. And me? I received my sentence with my head held high. I don't deny what I did. I don't seek forgiveness. When the judge asked me if I regretted it, I looked him in the eyes and told the truth. I only regret not realizing sooner the danger she represented. I regret the lives that could have been spared. 8 years have passed since that day. 8 years living between these walls, with a routine as regular as the tick-tock of the old clock in the visiting room. I wake up early, as I've always done. I make my bed with the care that Mama taught me back in the days of the old farmhouse. I have breakfast with the other ladies. Yes, there's a special pavilion for women my age, with health problems like mine. Arthritis doesn't let me do many physical activities, but I can still read, talk, and sometimes even help in the prison garden. People here treat me with a curious respect. The older guards already know my story. The newer ones soon hear the rumors. That's Mrs. Dorothy, the one who killed her own granddaughter. Some look at me with horror, others with a kind of veiled admiration. Most just leave me in peace, which is all I ask. I have my corner in the library where I spend most of my days. The person in charge, Mrs. Nelson, allows me to stay beyond hours sometimes. A lady of your age, with your impeccable record in here, deserves some privileges, she says. I think, deep down, she understands. We never talk about it directly, but once she mentioned she had a daughter who suffered at the hands of a predator. The way she said the word made me think that perhaps she too had taken some action that society wouldn't approve of. Life here isn't bad. I have my meals, my corner to sleep, my small routines. Alan's visits are what brighten my days the most. In the beginning, he came less frequently, still processing everything that happened. But with time, the visits became regular, once a month, without fail. He comes alone now. He and Cynthia separated a few years ago. Not because of blame or resentment, but because some wounds are too deep to heal completely. They maintain a respectful friendship, for the sake of the memories they shared before everything fell apart. Alan rebuilt his life. He went back to teaching, at another school, in another town. The students adore him, from what he tells me. He has that same calm way of his father, that same ability to really listen to people. Sometimes he brings photos of the projects he develops with the students. Community gardens, restoration of green areas, work with the elderly. It seems that the pain transformed him into someone even more sensitive to others' needs. I have some friends in here, women with different stories, but who, like me, reached a point in their lives where law and conventional morality offered no answers to their situations. We exchange stories, share memories of better times, talk about the children, the grandchildren we still have. Once a week, I participate in the craft group. My fingers are not as agile as before, but I can still do small embroideries, simple crochet. We make pieces that are sold in a charity fair at the end of the year. The money goes to a children's shelter. There's a certain irony in this that doesn't escape me. On visiting days, the yard gets full of families, mothers with children, grandparents with grandchildren. In these moments, I feel a pang of pain seeing the other grandmothers playing with their little grandchildren. I remember how Charles dreamed of having more grandchildren, of teaching them carpentry, of building wooden toys for them like he did for Vanessa when she was little. Destinies that will never be realized. Alan didn't have other children. I think, in a way, he fears that there's something in our blood, something that can be transmitted. I've tried to convince him that it's not like that Vanessa was a unique case, an anomaly. But I understand his fear. Some shadows are too long. He brings me books with each visit. He knows reading is my refuge. Through the pages, I can visit places I will never know in person, live lives that will never be mine. I've read more in these 8 years of prison than in all my previous life. Poetry, novels, history, biographies. I've discovered talents and interests I didn't even know I had. The other ladies here sometimes ask me for advice. It seems I've achieved a kind of wise woman status among them. Ironic, isn't it? Me, who made the most extreme decision possible, being consulted on issues of ethics and morality. But perhaps it's precisely because I crossed that line that I can talk about the limits with some authority. The nights are the hardest part. When the lights go out, when silence falls over the pavilion, that's when memories return with more force. Charles's face, his gentle smile, his calloused hands holding mine. Vanessa's baby face, before any shadow manifested in those little eyes. Family Sundays, lunches, laughter. The life we had, the life we could have had. I have nightmares sometimes, not about what I did. Strangely, that rarely torments me in dreams. But I dream about Charles trapped in that burning carpentry shop, screaming for help. I wake up in a cold sweat, with my heart racing. In these moments, the cell seems smaller, the air more rarefied. I breathe deeply, count to 10, and repeat to myself, I did what needed to be done. I don't expect to leave here. My sentence is life. And at my age, that means the rest of my days. I'm at peace with this. I don't think I could live in the world out there again. Here, I have a structure, a routine. Here, everyone knows who I am, what I did. There's no need for explanations or excuses. Life taught me that sometimes there are no right choices, only necessary choices. And with them come consequences that we must accept. I accepted mine. My dears who have listened to me this far, I know my story is heavy. It's not the kind of tale that grandmothers usually tell their grandchildren before bed. But it's true, with all the pain and marks it carries. If there's something I've learned in these 76 years of life, it's that the world isn't black and white. There are shadows in every corner, nuances in every decision. Love, that feeling that should always be pure and elevated, sometimes can lead us to dark places we never imagined visiting. For those who are facing situations similar to what I faced, and I sincerely hope they are few, I want to say, observe carefully. Pay attention to the signs. Don't ignore that uncomfortable feeling in your stomach when something seems wrong, even if everyone around says everything is fine. Trust your instincts. They exist for a reason. Remember that in every place, in every culture, there are people and organizations prepared to help. Seek them out before it's too late. Speak up, insist, document. Don't let love blind you to danger, even when that danger comes from someone who should be a source of joy and pride. I've lived long enough to know that some people are born different. It's not the parents' fault, it's not the upbringing's fault, it's nobody's fault. They simply are as they are. The important thing is to recognize this in time, to seek specialized help, to protect who needs to be protected. What I did can't be undone. I carry the weight of this decision every day. Each morning that I wake up, each night before I sleep, I think about what could have been different. If we had insisted more when Vanessa was little, if we had managed to get concrete evidence to convince Alan and Cynthia, if the system had worked when we needed it. But if is a road that leads nowhere, as my mother used to say. Today, I live with the consequences of my choices. And although the price was high, my freedom, the years I could have spent with my son, the chance to see Charles grow old by my side, there's a certain peace in knowing that I did what I believed was necessary. that I prevented more lives from being destroyed. The pain I carry is not just for the loss of my husband or for the life I left behind. It's also for the granddaughter I never really had, for the girl who could have been, but never was, for the wasted potential, for the chance of redemption that never existed. If you're watching me now and identify with any part of my story, whether as someone who suspects something is wrong or as someone who is suffering at the hands of another person, please seek help. There are trained professionals, there are shelters, there are people who will believe you. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until the only way out seems to be taking justice into your own hands. And finally, my dears, before I say goodbye, I want to ask once more. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect, please subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel and hit the bell. Each subscription gives me strength to continue sharing life stories so that other people can learn from my experiences, from my mistakes and successes. Leave your comment with the word justice so I know you've reached the end of this journey with me. Do it now. Don't wait one more minute. Your subscription can help others find strength to seek help when they need it. Thank you for listening to this old lady. May God bless you and keep your families safe from any harm. That night, when I discovered they were poisoning my mother, I realized I had two choices. I could be the useless daughter who would let my mother die, or I could be the killer who would save her. I chose the second option. The coffee I prepared for them was the last they ever drank. Hello, my dears. What a blessing to have you here with me today. My name is Betty Anderson, but everyone here in Millville, Pennsylvania, knows me as Miss Betty. I'm 78 years old, well-lived. Each wrinkle on my face tells a different story, you know? I was born in Hillsborough, also here in Pennsylvania, but it's been more than 30 years since I've lived in this welcoming little town that embraced me like a daughter. These days, my life is pretty quiet, you know? Every morning I wake up early, even before the sun appears. I like to prepare my hot coffee and reflect on life. My house is simple, but full of love. Each photograph tells a piece of my life, the people who passed through it, the good moments, and the bad ones too, which weren't few. But before I continue, I'd like to make a special request to you who are watching me now. If you're enjoying my story, please leave a like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, okay? That way you won't miss any of my stories. And tell me in the comments, which little town are you watching me from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that I've never told anyone. A story about family, about pain, and about how sometimes we need to make choices that nobody should have to make. The world isn't always fair to us, my dears. Sometimes justice needs to be done by our own hands. You'll understand what I mean. My story begins many years ago, when I was still young, full of dreams, and had to watch my mother suddenly fall ill. That's when I discovered that the people who should protect us aren't always the ones who actually do. Sometimes evil is under our own roof, sitting at the table with us, smiling while planning the worst. I was born in a simple house in Hillsborough, there in rural Pennsylvania. It was a small house, but full of life, with a backyard that had a bit of everything, a cherry tree that gave sweet red fruits, a patch of herbs that my mother tended with care, and even a coop with some free-range chickens that gave us fresh eggs every morning. My father, Jack Anderson, worked as a bricklayer. An honest man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone stopped to listen. He had rough, calloused hands from working so much, but with them he built our house, brick by brick. My mother, Odette Wilson Anderson, was a homemaker who cared for us with that silent and strong way of country women. She worked magic in the kitchen with little of everything. Her beans, seasoned with bacon and herbs, were the best in the area. There were 3 of us siblings. Me, the middle child, squeezed between Jim, 2 years older, and Walter, my little brother, 3 years younger. Jim was always Dad's favorite, learned men's things quickly, fishing, fixing things, handling tools. Walter was the joy of the house, cheerful, mischievous, the kind that makes people smile just by looking at him. Our childhood was simple but nice. We played tag in the vacant lot near the house, climbed trees, played marbles. Sometimes, on hot days, we would go to the small creek that ran on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but for us it was quite an adventure. I remember the feeling of cool water on my feet while we tried to catch minnows with our hands. The school was about a 15-minute walk from home. It was a small school with only 4 classrooms, but Miss Zenith was a loving person. She was the one who taught me to like reading. She loaned me books and said I had a good head for studies. I think she was the first person who believed I could be more than just Jack's daughter, the bricklayer. Our lives changed when I was 12 years old. My mother, who had always been healthy as a horse, started complaining of severe headaches. At first, nobody paid much attention. Everyone gets headaches, right? But then, on a Sunday morning, while she was washing the breakfast dishes, I saw her suddenly stop, with a lost look. Her left arm fell limp, and the cup she was holding shattered on the floor. Before I could call for help, she collapsed. It all happened very quickly. "Stroke," said the doctor at the clinic when we arrived with her, terrified. There wasn't much they could do in our small town. They sent her to the hospital in Pittsburgh, but when she came back home, she was no longer the same. She was left with the left side of her body paralyzed, slurred speech, needing help for everything, eating, dressing, bathing. From one day to the next, our house became a different place. That strong and active woman was transformed into a dependent person, bedridden in a small room at the back of the house that my father had hastily fixed up. And I, who had barely left childhood, suddenly found myself responsible for taking care of her. "Now you'll have to take over the house," my father told me, with that hard look that didn't allow for discussion. "Your older brother needs to work with me at the construction site, and the youngest is still too little. The responsibility is yours." So, at 12 years old, my childhood ended. I woke up before everyone else, prepared breakfast, packed lunch for Dad and Jim, fed my mother, changed the sheets when she couldn't control her needs. I ran to school and came back even faster, always afraid that she might need something and I wouldn't be there. The worst wasn't the heavy work, the exhaustion, or having to give up children's games. The worst was seeing my father and older brother changing, day by day. They would come home from work tired, irritated, and take it all out on me. Any little thing was a reason. "The food's cold. The house is a mess. Your mother stinks. You didn't bathe her properly." At first, I cried in hiding. Later, I learned to hold back the tears. Crying didn't help. Nobody was listening. As time passed, the situation at home only got worse. What started as impatience and irritation from my father and older brother soon turned into something much darker and more painful. It was no longer just an occasional shout or complaint about the food. It was something constant, as if I had become the target of all their anger. "Hurry up, you cow! Your mother is waiting!" my father would yell when he saw me sitting for a minute, trying to catch my breath. That was the first time he called me that, and the word cut me like a knife. It didn't take long for my brother Jim to pick up the same habit. "Our cow is tired? Want to lie down in the pasture?" he would mock when he saw me exhausted after a whole day of taking care of the house and my mother. Sometimes he would walk by and push me against the wall or give me a slap on the head like someone hitting a stubborn animal. "Stupid cow, can't even make rice properly." By the time I was 13, I no longer went to school. My father said it was a waste of time, that I had to stay home taking care of my mother. Miss Zenith came to our house once, concerned about my absences, but my father sent her away, saying that our family's business wasn't anyone's problem. "Your mother's like this because of you," my father accused me one night, after drinking almost a whole bottle of whiskey. If you didn't cause so much trouble, she wouldn't have gotten sick. It was a lie, I knew it was. But I heard it so many times that I began to believe it. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I deserved to be treated that way. My only consolation was taking care of my mother. Despite everything, I loved her so much. Even though she could no longer speak properly or hug me with both arms, I saw in her eyes a love that no one could take away from us. In the moments when we were alone, I would comb her hair, tell stories, talk about the flowers in the yard, anything to bring a little light to that suffering life. One of the hardest things was giving her the medications. The doctor had prescribed several, for blood pressure, to prevent another stroke, for pain. I kept everything in a shoebox, with the schedules written on a small piece of paper. It was a lot of responsibility for a girl my age, but I made a point of never making a mistake. But over time, I began to notice something strange. No matter how carefully I took care of her, following all the guidelines, my mother seemed to be getting worse instead of better. She was always drowsy, increasingly weak, with dark circles and a pallor that wasn't normal. Sometimes when I gave her water, I noticed that she choked more frequently, as if she was losing even the ability to swallow. "Dad, I think Mom needs to go to the doctor again," I said one afternoon, gathering all the courage I had. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Doctors are expensive and useless," he answered dryly. "She's already condemned anyway, it's just a matter of time." The coldness of that response frightened me. It was as if he was talking about an old pet, not his wife, the mother of his children. It was around this time that my younger brother Walter started to distance himself. At 10 years old, he was still a child, but he already realized that something was very wrong in our house. He started spending more time at the neighbors, coming home only to sleep, as if he was afraid of what he might find. "Why do Dad and Jim call you a cow?" he asked me once, with his eyes full of confusion. I didn't know what to answer. How do you explain to a child something that even I didn't understand? One night, while bathing my mother, I noticed something I had never seen before. Small purple bruises scattered on her arms and legs, as if someone had squeezed her hard. I stayed looking at that, not understanding. She didn't move by herself. There was no way she could have hurt herself like that. "Mom, who did this to you?" I asked, even knowing that she couldn't answer me clearly. To my surprise, she managed to mumble a few words, among them my father's name. Her eyes were full of fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I had seen, about my mother's broken words, about my father's increasing coldness. Something was happening in that house, something beyond the name-calling and pushes that I was already used to receiving. The next day, I woke up determined to pay more attention. I started noticing small details, how my father made a point of preparing himself the tea that my mother took every night, how he and Jim whispered when they thought I wasn't listening, how they looked at my mother not with concern but with impatience, as if they were waiting for something. "This old woman never dies," I heard my father say to my brother one afternoon when they thought I was in the backyard. The phrase froze my blood. What were they waiting for? Why did they want her to die? That's when I started spying, pretending to go out to hang clothes when in fact I was listening behind the door, waking up in the middle of the night to see what was happening around the house, observing every gesture, every look exchanged between my father and my brother. The puzzle started to come together when, during one of those night watches, I saw my father enter my mother's room thinking everyone was asleep. Through the crack in the door, I watched as he took a small vial from his pocket and poured a few drops into the glass of water that sat on the bedside table. Then, with a coldness that terrified me, he stood there, staring at her with a smile at the corner of his mouth. That scene changed everything for me. Suddenly, I understood why my mother was getting worse instead of better. I understood the looks, the whispers, the impatience. They weren't just mistreating me. They were doing something much worse to my mother. The question was, why? The answer came the next day, when my father went out and left his office key on the table. We were never allowed to enter there. It was his sacred territory. But at that moment, I needed to know the truth. With my heart beating fast, I entered the room and started going through the drawers. It was in a folder hidden at the bottom of the last drawer that I found what I was looking for: a life insurance policy in my mother's name, with an amount that was a fortune for us. Next to it, several vials of medicines I had never seen before, without label or package insert, hidden in an old toolbox. At that moment, the truth hit me like a punch in the stomach. My father and my brother weren't just waiting for my mother to die. They were helping it to happen, slowly, drop by drop, day after day. And I, without knowing, was being an accomplice, giving her the medicines they switched, the tea they prepared. I went back to her room with a heavy heart, looked at that fragile woman in the bed, and cried like I had never cried before. How could they do this to her? How could they be so cruel, so inhuman? "I'm going to save you, Mom," I whispered, holding her hand. "I swear I'm going to save you." But how? How could a 13-year-old girl fight against two adult men, one of them her own father? How could I prove what they were doing? Who would believe me, the cow, the girl who didn't even go to school anymore? It was on that night that something inside me changed forever. The scared girl gave way to someone stronger, more determined, someone who was no longer afraid, someone who was ready to do whatever was necessary. The days that followed were the most difficult of my life. Now that I knew the truth, every second in that house was like stepping on a minefield. I had to pretend that I didn't know anything, continue taking care of my mother, obey my father and brother's orders, while inside my heart was in pieces. The worst was giving the medicines to my mother. Now I was sure that many of them weren't what they should be. I began to make small sabotages. I would throw some pills away when no one was looking, dilute the night tea with more water than usual, pretend to give the medicines, but hide them under her pillow. In just 1 week, I noticed small improvements. My mother seemed more alert, less drowsy. Her eyes regained some of their shine. But that also meant danger. If my father and brother noticed, they would know something was wrong. The physical abuse got worse during this period. It was as if they felt I was resisting somehow, even without knowing exactly how. The pushes got stronger, the slaps more frequent. Once my brother Jim pushed me so hard against the stove that I burned my arm. I had to bite my lip not to scream in pain. "Pay attention to what you're doing, you useless cow," he yelled, showing no remorse when he saw the red mark forming on my skin. "If the food burns again, you'll get a real beating." The threats became routine. My father would come home, and the first thing he did was look for something to complain about. A corner of dust, a stain on the floor, anything served as a pretext. "A useless girl, that's what you are," he would say, between sips of whiskey. "You can't even take care of your mother properly. She's getting worse every day." I knew it was exactly the opposite. She was improving precisely because I was preventing them from poisoning her, but I couldn't say anything. I had to lower my head and accept the insults, the humiliations, the slaps. Each mark on my body was a reminder of what I was fighting to prevent. My younger brother, Walter, was beginning to understand what was happening. One afternoon, he found me crying, hidden in the backyard, after Jim had pushed me against the wall. "Why don't you run away?" he asked, with his little eyes full of fear and confusion. "And leave Mom alone with them?" "Never," I replied, wiping away the tears. "They're hurting her, Walter. They're giving her bad medicine." He didn't seem to fully understand, but he hugged me tight. It was the only hug I received in those dark days. I asked him not to tell anyone about our conversation. If my father or Jim found out, the consequences would be terrible. One night, while I was washing the dinner dishes, I heard my father and my brother talking in his room. I approached silently, holding my breath to hear better. "She's not dying fast enough," my father complained, his voice slurred by drink. "It's been over a year, and this woman won't give her last breath." "Maybe we need to increase the dose," Jim suggested, with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "Or try another method." It's too risky, my father replied. It has to look natural, otherwise the insurance won't pay. But I'm tired of waiting. I want the money soon. And the cow? My brother asked, referring to me. I felt a knot in my throat when I heard that hateful nickname. She's suspicious. The other day I caught her looking at the medicines with a strange face. There was a moment of silence before my father answered. After her mother dies and we get the money, we'll deal with her too. We'll send her away or put her in some institution. She's too stupid to manage on her own. Those words hit me like a punch in the stomach. It wasn't enough to kill my mother. After that, it would be my turn. They saw me as a problem to be eliminated, an obstacle in their path to the insurance money. I went back to the kitchen with my heart racing, my hands shaking so much that I dropped a glass, which shattered on the floor. The noise attracted my father and brother, who came running to see what had happened. "What was that, you clumsy girl?" my father yelled, grabbing me by the arm with such force that it left marks. "Can't you even hold a glass properly?" "It was an accident," I mumbled, eyes down, trying not to show the terror I felt inside. "It slipped from my hand." "That's why we call you a cow," Jim said, with a malicious little smile. "Cows don't have hands, they have hooves, and hooves don't hold glasses." The two of them laughed as if it was the funniest joke in the world. I stood there, motionless, feeling a hatred growing inside me, a hatred I had never felt before. At that moment, I knew I needed to do something. I could no longer just defend myself or try to protect my mother discreetly. I needed a definitive plan. The following night, I pretended to be asleep when my father went to my mother's room to perform his usual ritual, a few drops in her water glass. But this time, as soon as he left, I silently entered the room and switched the glass for another one I had hidden under the bed, with clean water. I kept the glass with the poisoned water in a safe place, wrapped in a cloth inside an old can at the back of the yard. It would be the proof I needed if I could escape with her to seek help. But who would help? Who could I turn to? The police were in the next town. The neighbors were afraid of my father, known for his violent temper. Miss Zenith hadn't shown up since my father had expelled her from our house. That's when I remembered Nurse Cindy, who had taken care of my mother at the clinic right after the stroke. She had always been kind to us, always asked how we were doing. Maybe she could help, maybe she could examine my mother and confirm my suspicions. The problem was how to get to her without my father or brother finding out. I never left the house alone. Always one of them accompanied me, like a shadow, pretending it was protection, but it was really surveillance. One morning, while serving breakfast, I gathered my courage and risked. "Dad, I think Mom has a wound on her back that won't heal. Shouldn't we take her to the clinic?" He looked at me suspiciously, but I could see that the idea worried him. A wound that wouldn't heal could turn into something more serious, something that would raise suspicions. "I'll take her," he said finally, after thinking for a bit. "You stay and clean the house properly. It's a pigsty." That was my chance. While he was getting ready to take my mother, I ran to her room and whispered in her ear, "Mom, when you get to the clinic, try to make a sign to Nurse Cindy. Try to show that something is wrong. Please." I don't know if she fully understood, but her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that I hadn't seen in months. It was as if, despite all the mental confusion caused by the stroke and the poisons, she understood that her life depended on that moment. I spent the day in agony, waiting for their return. When they finally arrived, my father seemed irritated, more than usual. "That nosy nurse wants to do some tests on her," he grumbled, dragging my mother's wheelchair inside. "She said her vital signs are weird, that there might be something wrong besides the stroke." My heart leaped. Nurse Cindy had noticed. Maybe there was a chance after all. "When are the tests?" I asked, trying not to seem too anxious. "Next week," he replied, staring at me suspiciously. "Why the interest? Want to get rid of the work of taking care of her?" "No, Dad, of course not," I replied quickly. "I just want her to get better." He mumbled something incomprehensible and went to the kitchen to get a drink. I took the opportunity to look quickly at my mother. Her eyes were different, more alive, as if they had regained a purpose. In an almost imperceptible movement, she moved the fingers of her right hand, the only ones that still responded well, and made a gesture that seemed to say, "Wait." That night, my brother Jim seemed especially agitated. He walked back and forth, whispering with my father, casting glances in my direction. I could feel that something was wrong, very wrong. When I went to give dinner to my mother, he stood at the door, watching me with those cold eyes. "You know, Cal, I think you've been very worried about Mom lately," he said, with a tone that made my skin crawl, almost as if you were afraid something would happen to her. I swallowed hard, trying not to show the dread I felt. "I just want to take good care of her," I replied, without looking at him, like I've always done. "Yeah, but I think you're taking care of her too much, as if you knew something you shouldn't know." He approached, standing just inches from my face. I could smell the cigarette on his breath. "If you know something, little sister, you better keep quiet, understand? Very quiet." The threat was crystal clear. They suspected me. Maybe they had noticed the missing medicines or the subtle improvements in my mother's condition. Either way, I was in danger, and time was running out. That very night, something happened that changed everything. Something that transformed my fear into determination, my hesitation into certainty. It was late, maybe close to midnight, when I heard a noise coming from my mother's room. I got up right away, my heart racing, and ran down the dark hallway. The door was ajar, and through the crack I saw a scene I will never forget. My father was leaning over her bed, holding a pillow in his hands. On his face, an expression that mixed anger and determination. My mother, awake, looked at him with eyes wide with pure terror. "I'm tired of waiting," he muttered, his voice slurred from too much drinking. "Tired of spending on you. Today it ends." He started to lower the pillow towards her face. It all happened very quickly. Without thinking, I burst into the room shouting, "Dad, no!" He turned, surprised by my presence. For a second, he seemed confused, as if he didn't understand what I was doing there. Then, the confusion gave way to fury. He dropped the pillow and came towards me. "What are you doing here, you meddler? Go to your room." "You were going to kill her," I accused, unable to control myself. "I saw. You were going to suffocate her with the pillow." His hand hit my face with such force that I fell to the floor. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. "You didn't see anything," he said, pulling me by the hair. "And if you tell anyone this crazy story, nobody will believe you. They'll think it's something from your stupid girl's head." He dragged me down the hall to my room and threw me on the bed. "Stay here and don't come out until tomorrow, and if I hear a peep, you'll regret it." He locked the door from the outside, leaving me in panic. I ran to the window, but it had bars, a protection that he had installed years ago, supposedly to prevent burglars. I spent the night awake, crying softly, desperate for not being able to protect my mother. Every minute I imagined what might be happening in her room. Had he gone back to finish what he started? Was she still alive? When the sun rose, I heard the key turning in the lock. It was my brother Jim. "Dad wants you in the kitchen, now." I got up trembling, with my face still sore from the slap. Before leaving, I asked, "How's Mom?" He shrugged, indifferent. "Alive, unfortunately." That word, unfortunately, was like a knife in my heart. They really wanted her to die. It wasn't my paranoia. It wasn't exaggeration. It was the pure truth. In the kitchen, my father was sitting at the table, drinking black coffee. He seemed calm, as if nothing had happened the night before. "Sit down," he ordered, pointing to the chair in front of him. I obeyed, feeling my legs weaken. "Your mother fell out of bed last night," he said, staring at me firmly. "I was trying to put her back when you came in like a crazy person, yelling nonsense. Understand?" I understood at that moment that he was constructing a new version of the story. A version in which I was the crazy one, the problematic one, the liar. That's not what I saw, I replied, gathering all the courage I had left. His expression hardened. You saw what I'm saying you saw. And if anyone asks, that's what you'll tell. Or else. He left the phrase hanging in the air, but the threat was clear. Your mother's tests were canceled, he continued, drinking his coffee calmly. I called the clinic and said she's better, that she doesn't need them anymore. My heart sank. It was the only hope I had, that someone from outside, someone with medical authority, would notice what was happening. And before you get other crazy ideas, he added, know that I told the people at the clinic that you've been very nervous, imagining things. I said we're worried about your head. They agreed that maybe it would be good for you to consult with a specialist. His plan was perfect. If I tried to denounce him, it would be his word against mine. And he had already planted the seed that I was unstable, imaginative, maybe even crazy. Who would believe a 13-year-old girl against an adult man, respected in the community? That day, they allowed me to see my mother for only a few minutes, always with my father or Jim in the room. She seemed weaker than ever, her eyes half closed, her breathing shallow. When I tried to hold her hand, I noticed new purple marks on her wrist. At night, I heard my father and Jim talking again, this time in the kitchen. We can't wait any longer, my father was saying. That nurse is already suspicious, and your sister, the cow, almost ruined everything yesterday. What do you want to do? Jim asked, his voice low but excited, as if they were planning an adventure and not a murder. Tomorrow is Saturday. We'll have some whiskey as usual, but this time we'll make it look like your mother had another stroke during the night. Natural, like the doctor said could happen. My blood froze. They were planning to kill her the next night, and I would be next. I spent that night in a state of desperation that I had never felt before. I was trapped in a house with murderers, with no way to ask for help, nowhere to run. I couldn't save my mother. I couldn't save myself. It was in that darkest moment that a memory emerged in my mind. A story that my mother told before she got sick, about how her grandmother, back in rural Pennsylvania, knew the properties of plants. How some cured, others relieved pain, and some could be dangerous if used the wrong way. Even the prettiest herbs can be poison in the right hands, she would say. Poison. The word echoed in my mind like a bell. I looked out the window, to the backyard, where the herbs that my mother loved so much to take care of grew. Some still survived, even with my clumsy care. Among them, some that she had taught me to never touch, never use in food. A terrible idea began to form in my head. An idea that went against everything I believed in, everything my mother taught me about respect for life. But what else could I do? They were going to kill her. After that, it would be my turn. No one would help us. No one would believe me. My head spun with contradictory thoughts. Part of me screamed that it was wrong, that I couldn't lower myself to their level. Another part, more pragmatic, more desperate, insisted that it was the only way out. It's self-defense, I whispered to myself, tears streaming down my face. It's to save Mom, to save myself. I closed my eyes and saw my mother's face before the stroke, smiling, full of life, full of love. I remembered the stories she told, the songs she sang to help me sleep. I remembered how she always said I was special, that I was strong, that one day I would do important things. I opened my eyes with a new resolution. I wouldn't let them kill her like an animal. I wouldn't let them treat me like trash afterwards. If they wanted to use poison, I would show them what real poison was. The next morning, I got up early, before everyone else. I went to the backyard and with trembling hands picked some leaves from that plant that my mother always warned to avoid. Not many, just enough. I kept them wrapped in a piece of cloth hidden in the pocket of my apron. During the day, I acted normally, or as normally as possible under the circumstances. I took care of my mother, cleaned the house, prepared the meals. My father and Jim seemed in a good mood, exchanging complicit looks when they thought I wasn't watching. At night, as they always did on Saturdays, they sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, talking loudly, laughing at crude jokes. Once in a while, one of them would come in to check if I was taking care of my mother properly. "I'll make some strong coffee for you," I offered when the bottle was half empty. "It's getting cold. It'll do you good." My father nodded, not paying much attention to me. Jim just mumbled something that I interpreted as agreement. In the kitchen, with hands shaking so much I could barely hold the kettle, I prepared the strongest coffee I had ever made. When the water boiled and the coffee was ready, I took the leaves from my pocket. They were dry now, easier to crumble. I put them at the bottom of their cups and covered them with the dark coffee. The strong smell of the drink would mask any other odor. For a moment, I hesitated. What I was about to do would change everything forever. There was no going back. Once done, I would carry this for the rest of my life. But then I heard their laughter on the porch, that cruel laughter I knew so well, and I remembered the pillow in my father's hands, the purple marks on my mother's body, the threats, the insults, the humiliations. I remembered that, for them, we weren't people. We were just obstacles in the way to the insurance money. "Dad, Jim, the coffee's ready," I called, bringing the cups to the porch. They took the cups without even looking at me, still involved in their conversation about how much money they would have when it was all over. I turned my back and went inside, to my mother's room. I sat next to her, holding her fragile hand between mine. She was sleeping, or seemed to be sleeping, her breathing irregular, her face thin and pale. I stayed there, waiting, praying for forgiveness for what I had done, for what was to come. I don't know how much time passed until I heard the first noise, something falling, breaking. Then came a muffled scream, followed by another louder one. I squeezed my mother's hand harder. "Everything's going to be okay now," I whispered, although I wasn't sure if she could hear me. "No one is going to hurt you anymore. I promise." The minutes that followed are like a blur in my memory. I heard more noises on the porch, cups breaking, chairs falling, confused voices shouting. Then, silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow the whole house. I stayed paralyzed next to my mother's bed, unable to move, to check what had happened out there. Part of me knew, but another part didn't want to confirm. As if, as long as I didn't see, I could pretend nothing had happened. It was my mother who brought me back to reality. Her eyes opened and fixed on mine with a lucidity that I hadn't seen in a long time. Her hand squeezed mine lightly. "Daughter," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak but clear. "What did you do?" Those 3 words hit me like lightning. She knew. Somehow, even in her debilitated state, she knew what I had done. "I saved us, Mom," I replied, tears streaming down my face. "They were going to kill you tonight. After that, it would be me." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the weight of those words. When she opened them again, there was something different in them. Not disapproval as I feared, but an infinite sadness. "Police," she managed to say. "Call police." I knew she was right. There was no way to hide what had happened. Sooner or later, someone would find out. Better that it be on our terms, with our version of the story. I got up on shaky legs and went to the phone in the living room. We had never used it to call the police before. Actually, we rarely used the phone. It was more of a show-off item for my father than a necessity. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number of the sheriff's office in the next town. When a male voice answered, the words came out in a cascade. "Please, I need help. I think my father and my brother are dead." The voice on the other end became alert. "Where are you? What happened?" I gave our address and, after a moment of hesitation, added, "They were poisoning my mother. For months, to get the insurance money. I put something in their coffee. Please come quickly." I hung up and went back to my mother's room, feeling as if I was floating outside my body. It was as if that girl on the phone was someone else, not me. As if all of this was happening to another family, in another house. "They're already coming, Mom," I said, going back to hold her hand. "Everything's going to be okay." But would it be? I had just confessed to a crime. No matter the circumstances, no matter why I had done it, there were 2 dead people on the porch of our house, and I was responsible. Time seemed to drag on as we waited. At some point, my younger brother, Walter, appeared at the door of the room, his eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Dad and Jim are strange. They're not moving." I extended my hand to him, and he ran into my arms. "Everything's going to be all right," I repeated, although I wasn't sure if it was true. "The police are coming. They'll help." I don't know how long we stayed like that, me, my mother, and Walter, when we heard the sirens in the distance. Soon the house was full of police officers and paramedics. Some went straight to the porch, others came to check on my mother. They separated me from my brother, taking each of us to a different corner to ask questions. The police officer who talked to me was a middle-aged man with tired but kind eyes. He introduced himself as Sheriff Ignazio. "Tell me what happened here, girl," he asked, sitting next to me in the kitchen. "From the beginning." And so I did. I told him everything. My mother's stroke, the mistreatment, the suspicions of poisoning, the discovery of the insurance policy, my father's attempt to suffocate her with the pillow, their plan for that night, and finally, what I had done. "I know I did something terrible," I concluded, looking at my trembling hands. "I know I'm going to jail. But I had to save my mother. There was no one else to help." The sheriff was silent for a long moment, watching me. "I want you to show me where you found the insurance policy and the medicines," he finally said. I took him to my father's office, pointed to the drawer where I had found the documents. To my surprise, everything was still there. The policy, the suspicious vials, even my father's notes about dosages. "And you say you saved a sample of the poisoned water that your father gave your mother?" he asked. I nodded and took him to the back of the yard, where I dug up the can with the carefully wrapped glass. The sheriff called another officer, who put the glass in a plastic bag, labeled it, and stored it away. When we got back inside, the paramedics were already taking my mother on a stretcher. I ran to her, in panic. "Where are they taking her?" I asked, grabbing her hand. "To the hospital in Pittsburgh," replied one of the paramedics. "She needs urgent care." My mother squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "It's going to be okay," she managed to say, her eyes fixed on mine. Then she looked at the sheriff, who was by my side. "She saved my life." The words came out with difficulty, but they were clear enough. The sheriff nodded gravely. "We're going to take care of her, ma'am. You can rest easy." When they took my mother away, I felt as if they were ripping out a piece of me. Walter was in the corner of the living room, being comforted by a female police officer. He looked so small, so lost. "And my brother?" I asked the sheriff. "What's going to happen to him?" "We're going to find relatives who can stay with him for now," he replied. "Do you have any uncles, aunts, grandparents?" I thought of my mother's family, whom we hadn't seen in years because my father wouldn't allow it. "Mom has a sister in Erie, Aunt Ivy. She liked us a lot." The sheriff wrote down the name and promised they would try to locate her. Then came the part I feared most. "Betty," said the sheriff, using my name for the first time, "you need to come with us to the station." I nodded, already expecting this. I was ready to face the consequences of what I had done. Before leaving, I asked to say goodbye to my brother. "They're going to take you to Aunt Ivy's house," I explained, hugging him tight. "She's good. She'll take good care of you." "And you? And Mom?" he asked, his eyes full of tears. "Mom is going to the hospital to get better. And I'll have to go with the police for a while." "Will you come back?" he insisted, holding my hand tightly. I didn't have the courage to tell the truth, that I probably wouldn't come back, at least not for many years. "One day," I replied, kissing his forehead. Take care of Mom for me, okay? At the police station, I spent hours answering questions, repeating my story several times to different officers. Then, I was taken to a small room with a bed where I spent the night. The next morning, Sheriff Ignacio came back with news. Your mother is stable at the hospital, he informed. The doctors did tests and found high doses of medications in her blood, some that shouldn't even be there. This confirms your story about the poisoning. I felt an immense relief to know that my mother was alive and being well cared for. And there's more, he continued. We found your brother Jim's diary. He wrote about the plans to kill your mother, about how you two were a burden. It's quite disturbing. The sheriff seemed genuinely shaken by what he had read. We located your Aunt Ivy, he added. She's already come to pick up your brother Walter and said she'll accompany your mother at the hospital. Finally, some good news. They would be together, at least. And what about me? I asked, already knowing the answer. The sheriff sighed deeply. It's complicated, Betty. You committed a serious crime, there's no denying that. But the circumstances are exceptional. He explained to me that, because I was a minor, I wouldn't be tried as an adult. I would be referred to a juvenile judge who would decide my fate. I could be placed in a juvenile detention facility or, if I was lucky, placed under some kind of supervised release. I'll speak to the judge personally, the sheriff promised. I'll tell him what I saw in that house, what we discovered about your father and your brother. I can't promise anything, but I think he'll take all of this into account. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in a juvenile facility, waiting for the judge's decision. My Aunt Ivy came to visit me a few times, bringing news of my mother. She was slowly getting better after they stopped giving her the wrong medicines. She could already speak better, and the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. Walter also came with my aunt. He seemed happy, or at least happier than I had ever seen him in our house. Aunt Ivy treated him with affection, and he was already enrolled in a new school in Erie. When the day of the hearing with the judge finally arrived, I was resigned to accept any punishment. I had made a terrible choice, but I still believed it was the only one I had under the circumstances. To my surprise, the judge, a white-haired man with a severe but not unkind expression, listened to my case very carefully. Sheriff Ignacio testified on my behalf, describing in detail what he had found in the house, my father and brother's plans, the evidence of abuse and poisoning. My mother, still weak but able to speak, also testified via video conference from the hospital. She confirmed the years of abuse she had suffered at the hands of my father, how he had treated her as an object, not as a wife. And most importantly, she confirmed that, after the stroke, she realized she was being poisoned, but had no strength to ask for help. My daughter saved my life, she said, her voice choked. She did what I couldn't do for myself. At the end of the hearing, the judge retired to deliberate. When he returned, his decision caught me completely by surprise. Betty Anderson, he began, what you did was extremely serious. Taking a life, let alone two, is an act that can never be taken lightly. I lowered my head, preparing for the worst. However, he continued, after analyzing all the evidence, the medical reports, the testimonies, including that of Sheriff Ignacio and your mother, I understand that you were in a situation of imminent danger. You and your mother were under constant threat, and there was a concrete plan to kill her that night. He paused, looking directly at me. Considering all these factors, I will not order your internment in a juvenile detention facility. Instead, you will be under supervised release for 3 years with mandatory psychological counseling and regular visits to a social worker. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at Sheriff Ignacio, who was smiling discreetly. You will be able to live with your Aunt Ivy in Erie, along with your mother when she is discharged from the hospital, and your brother Walter, continued the judge. But you must understand that what you did was wrong, regardless of the circumstances. Justice should not be taken into one's own hands, even in desperate situations. I understand, Your Honor, I replied, my voice choked with emotion, and I accept any condition. There's one more thing, he added. When your mother is fully recovered, the insurance policy will be paid to her, since she was the legal beneficiary. Your father had tried to change this, but didn't have time to complete the process. That news left me stunned. The money that my father and brother had been willing to kill for would now help my mother restart her life. There was a poetic justice in that which didn't go unnoticed. That same day, I left the facility with my Aunt Ivy. We went straight to the hospital to see my mother, who cried when she hugged me. She was different, still weak, still with after effects of the stroke, but there was a light in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. A light of someone who was finally free. My mother's recovery was slow but steady. After 3 months in the hospital, she finally was discharged and came to live with us at Aunt Ivy's house in Erie. With the insurance money, we bought a small but comfortable house in Millville, a quiet little town in Pennsylvania where nobody knew us, where we could start over without the weight of the past haunting us. The 3 years of supervised release were difficult. I had frequent nightmares. I blamed myself for what I had done, no matter how much the psychologist who accompanied me tried to show me that I had acted in a moment of extreme desperation. But little by little, with the support of my mother, Walter, and Aunt Ivy, I began to understand that, despite the terrible act I had committed, I wasn't a terrible person. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, the psychologist would say. Now you need to learn to live with it and to forgive yourself. And that's what I tried to do, day after day, year after year. Go back to studying, take care of my mother, see my brother grow up happy and healthy. Build a life that honored the second chance I received. Today, more than 60 years after those terrible days, I live a quiet life here in Millville. I never left this little town since we moved here. I found a place where I could heal my wounds, where I could rebuild myself as a person. My mother lived 10 more years after I saved her from that hell. She never fully recovered from the stroke. She always needed a cane to walk and had difficulties speaking when she was tired. But they were 10 years of peace, of love, of true affection. She was able to see Walter graduate from high school, see me start nursing school. I think she departed in peace, knowing that her children were safe, that they had a future ahead of them. Aunt Ivy stayed with us until the end. Even after we bought our own house here in Millville, she never wanted to go back to Erie. "My place is with you," she would say, with that sweet smile that was her trademark. It was she who taught me to forgive, not my father or my brother, but myself. It was she who helped me understand that a decision made in desperation does not define who we are for the rest of our lives. My brother Walter grew up strong and good, without the shadows of the past haunting him like they did me. He graduated in engineering, married a lovely woman named Clara, and gave me 3 nephews who are the light of my life, Gabriel, Rachel, and Matthew. Today he lives in Philadelphia, but comes to visit me regularly, especially on holidays and birthdays. As for me, I followed the path of nursing. Perhaps it was a form of compensation, of trying to save other lives after having taken 2. I worked more than 30 years in the small hospital in Millville, caring mainly for the elderly and patients with chronic diseases, those who, like my mother, needed constant care and special attention. I got married at 28 to August, a gentle and patient man I met during my internship at the hospital. He knew my story. I told him before accepting his proposal, thinking he would run away when he knew about my past. But he just held my hands and said, "It's not our worst moment that defines who we are, but how we choose to live after it." We had 2 children, Mary and Henry. I raised them with all the love and care I could give, always conscious of never reproducing the abusive patterns I saw in my childhood. August was an exemplary father, the kind of man who played on the floor with the children, who never raised his voice, who respected everyone around him. I lost my August 12 years ago, victim of a massive heart attack. It was an immense pain, but different from the one I felt in adolescence. This was a clean pain, without the poison of hatred or fear. Just longing, just love. Today, I live alone in this simple little house, but I never feel lonely. My children live nearby, Mary right here in Millville, and Henry in Harrisburg, just a 2-hour drive away. I have 5 grandchildren who fill my life with joy when they come to visit. The oldest, Philip, is already in college. The youngest, Julia, is only 8 years old and loves it when I make pancakes for her on Sunday afternoons. My days are peaceful, filled with small activities that give me pleasure. I wake up early, have my coffee looking at the garden that I cultivate with so much care. I have a cherry tree that bears fruit twice a year. The grandkids love to climb it to pick the sweet cherries. I also have rose bushes that I got from my neighbor Mrs. Cleo, and an herb garden that I use to make teas and season food. 3 times a week, I go to the community center in town to participate in a crafts group. I do crochet, knitting, embroidery, things I never had time or opportunity to learn when I was young. My patchwork quilts are famous in this region. I've made more than 50, most donated to nursing homes and orphanages. On Wednesdays, I participate in a project at the local elementary school where I tell stories to the children. Stories of overcoming, of courage, of kindness, values that I believe are fundamental to forming good human beings. The little ones call me Grandma Betty and run to hug me when I arrive. It's one of the greatest joys of my week. On Sundays, I go to church in the morning. I'm not overly religious, but I find comfort in faith, in the idea that there is a greater purpose for everything, even for suffering. After the service, I usually have my children and grandchildren over for a family lunch. The house gets noisy, full of laughter and conversations, exactly how a house should be. I never spoke again about what happened that Saturday night, so many years ago. My children know, of course. I thought they had the right to know the truth about their past. But to the rest of the world, I'm just Miss Betty, the retired nurse who does volunteer work and adores her grandchildren. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, looking at the stars from my porch, I think about how strange life is, how a single moment can change everything forever. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't discovered my father's plan, if I hadn't made that desperate decision. Probably neither my mother nor I would be alive. Walter would have grown up alone, perhaps becoming like his father and brother. I'm not proud of what I did. I never will be. Taking a life is a terrible thing, no matter the circumstances. But I don't torture myself anymore like before. I've learned to live with my past, to accept that at that moment, with the knowledge and resources I had, I did what I believed was the only option to save my mother and myself. Sheriff Ignazio, who was so important in those difficult days, became a friend over the years. He retired from the police and also came to live in Millville, saying he wanted peace after so many years seeing the worst of humanity. Until his death, 5 years ago, we used to have coffee together on Mondays. He always said that my case made him rethink many things about justice and compassion. Today, looking back, I see that my life has been a long journey of redemption. Each patient I cared for in the hospital, each child I educated, each act of kindness I practiced, everything was part of my attempt to balance the scales, to give back to the world more than I took from it. I don't know if I succeeded. I don't know if it's possible. But I know that I tried every day to be better than I was the day before. And maybe, in the end, that's all any of us can do. My dear viewers, after sharing this difficult, painful story, I want to leave some words from the bottom of my heart for you. Life sometimes puts us in situations where there are no perfect choices, where every path seems darker than the other. In those moments, we need to find within ourselves a strength we didn't even know we had. A strength that comes not from hatred, not from anger, but from love for ourselves and for those who depend on us. What I've learned in my almost 80 years of life is that we're never completely without hope. Even in the darkest nights, even when it seems that everyone has turned their back, there's always a possibility of change, of transformation, of starting over. If you're going through situations of abuse, if someone is hurting you, know that you're not alone. Today, there are many paths to help that I didn't have in my time. There are hotlines for reporting, there are shelters, there are professionals trained to help. Never believe when they tell you that you deserve suffering, that you're less than others, that you have no value. These are the lies that abusers tell to maintain their power over us. You have value, you deserve respect, you deserve to be loved. Often, we feel trapped in impossible situations. It seems there's no way out, that we'll suffer forever. But I'm here, on the other side of this journey, to tell you that's not true. There's always a different tomorrow. There's always a possibility of healing. When I look back and see that 13-year-old girl, desperate, not knowing where to run, I feel immense compassion. I wish I could hug her and tell her that, despite everything, she's going to survive. More than survive. She'll build a good life, a loving family. She'll help other people. Fear can paralyze us, but it can also give us wings when we need to flee from danger. Pain can destroy us, but it can also teach us about compassion and empathy. Hatred can consume our soul, but forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, can free it. You're not defined by your worst moments, by your most desperate decisions. You're defined by how you choose to live after them, by how you choose to rebuild, reinterpret, be reborn. In my long journey, I've learned that carrying guilt doesn't help anyone. Not ourselves, not those we've hurt, not those we love. What helps is transforming that guilt into positive action, into care, into service to others. I've also learned that silence is the greatest ally of violence. When we keep quiet, when we hide, when we pretend everything is okay when it's not, we give more power to abuse. That's why I speak today. That's why I share my story, so that other people know they're not alone, that there's a path beyond the darkness. Each life that touches ours has a purpose. Every person who crossed my path, even those who hurt me, taught me something important, and I choose to keep the lessons, not the resentment. If there's one thing time has taught me, it's that we're stronger than we imagine. Within each of us exists a capacity to survive, to adapt, to rebuild that is almost miraculous. My dear friends who watched until here, I ask you to help me spread this message of hope. If you liked my testimony, please leave your like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It's very important so that stories like mine can reach more people who need to hear that there is life beyond pain, that there is healing, that there is redemption. And leave in the comments the word survivor, so I know you watched until the end, that you heard my complete story. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. Each person you help to know this story may be someone who desperately needs hope at this moment. Always remember, no matter how deep the darkness, there's always a light at the end. Sometimes that light is ourselves, shining from the inside out, illuminating our own path when no one else can do it. May God bless each one of you, and may you never, ever lose faith in the possibility of better days. That faith kept me alive in my darkest moments, and it can do the same for you.